coming to you from the virtual city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Cyber Bryce. Tied with the popular recurring Out of the Dust Geek List on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we played that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 67. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Majesty for the Realm Out of the Dust, and a contributor will dust off Pandemic Legacy Season 1. On the reaction segment, I discuss the Spiel de Jahres nominations. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Dominion Menagerie. On the Obscure Bryce Game segment, I review JamSumo. And we wrap up the episode by continuing the BGG in my own top 5 countdown to 2015 with the number 3s on the list. I had a chance to bring Majesty for the Realm Out of the Dust recently. Majesty was published by Z-Man in 2017 and is from designer Marc-Andre of Splendor fame. I last played it 2 years, 1 month, and 23 days ago, shortly after it came out. I enjoyed it enough after learning it to show it to my wife when we were at the local board game cafe one day shortly after, and she liked it too. I added it to my wish list, but didn't pick it up until I got a good deal for a copy at the BGG Con virtual flea market last November. Amusingly, I got it back to the table by telling my wife that I was going to teach her something new, because I had totally forgotten I'd already taught it to her 2 years ago. So she was like, "No, I remember playing this before." And play it even more in the future we will, because Majesty is satisfying engine-building goodness. I remember after it came out, it was prematurely labeled, as so many games are, a Splendor killer. It's not, but that doesn't mean it doesn't warrant its own place in a collection or play rotation. I'm happy it finally made it into my collection, and could see us playing it a lot more in the near future. I like the variable setup that challenges players to find and utilize effective combos. This, combined with the tight meeple economy of the game, results in games that engagingly play out differently each time. I wouldn't mind an expansion for this game at some point to increase that variability even more. It seems like the sort of game that is just begging for one, and it continues to rack up a respectable quantity of logged plays each month. But it is a Z-Man game, which makes it difficult to predict any kind of relatively certain future for the game. Ah well, I'm satisfied with what I have for now. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Andreas Peterson, username PSON73, brought Pandemic Legacy Season 1 out of the dust. He last played it 1 year, 11 months, and 17 days ago, and currently rates it a 10 out of 10. He writes, "Just one dusty game for me this month, but it's Pandemic Legacy with almost 2 years worth of dust on it, gathered between the last game of September and the first game of October in the campaign. The reason is probably that the game is slightly daunting and falls into the category of stuff I feel should be a special event. I've come to realize that I do that with movies too, putting off watching ones I really want to see and rewatching known ones or B-list Netflix recommendations instead. However, as the experience was awesome, we'll probably pick up Season 2 to play anyway." Thanks for the contribution, Andreas. I know what you mean about wanting to save certain games for special occasions, but that was a good call in getting Season 2 now. I suspect you'll want to jump right into it after finishing Season 1. Reaction segment time. The Spiel nominations have been announced, and once again, it seems like the committee is throwing darts at which category a game should be nominated in. For the Spiel de Jahres, we have the latest Reiner Knizia game, My City, and a party game called Pictures, both of which haven't been released in North America yet, so I have no knowledge of either one of those. The third title nominated is Uwe Rosenberg's Nova Luna, which I reviewed in the last episode of Out of the Dust. Some fine recommended list games for that category too, including Draftosaurus and Fox in the Forest. For the Kennerspiel, we have The Crew, Cartographers, and The King's Dilemma, all of which seem like they could have easily have been nominated for the Spiel instead of the supposedly heavier Kennerspiel category. So once again, we see an apparent blurring of the lines between the two categories, and Kennerspiel being more of a Spiel 1.5. Many people are pointing out, and I agree, that the Kennerspiel recommended list of underwater cities, Res Arcana, and Paladins of the West Kingdom are what should have actually have been nominated. There were some Spiel committee members on the first segment of BGG Online last week, which included a live chat room and Q&A, so I requested they respond to this increasingly common criticism of category blurring. They reminded everybody that the Spiel is not for experienced gamers, and that their defining characteristic for the Spiel itself is that the game is easily playable right out of the box for a casual consumer just getting into the hobby, while the Kennerspiel is for those same people a year later with a little more experience under their belt. I've heard that Spiel explanation before, and I would contend that all of this Kennerspiel nominations could easily fit into that criteria. But I did find that Kennerspiel explanation interesting because I was under the impression that that award was for more experienced gamers. Their explanation just underlies the impression that the two awards really are becoming blurred, and their choices for nominations in recent years aren't very dramatic steps up at all. Their explanation makes it seem like the Kennerspiel is more of a lateral move. The committee members also emphasize their goal of promotion and exposure to the hobby, which is admirable, but I wonder if the committee understands how important and prestigious the Spiel des Jahres awards have become. A lot of people consider the Spiel des Jahres the Oscars of board games. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me to leave out heavier games that more experienced gamers would appreciate. Plenty of those games used to be nominated after all. Why are they suddenly considered less important? If promotion exposure is the goal, experienced gamers could definitely help with this. This just underlies the need for a new, heavier game category. The sheer number of games being released every year warrants another category all by itself. One thing I really appreciated about this interview, though, was the committee members' explanation of why they nominated each game, what stood out to them about these games, and why they put them in the categories they did. Some explanations were better than others, but I really wish these explanations were distributed as part of a press release with the nominee announcements, especially for the games that haven't made it to North America yet. I really enjoyed the discussion about why the committee thought these games were so great. I particularly found the explanation of the King's Dilemma's nomination compelling. They admitted that the rule set is not complicated at all, but justified its Kennerspiel nomination based on the moral complexity involved in the decision-making mechanic of the game. I'm not sure if that's a compelling enough reason to justify a bump in category, but understanding the thought process behind the nomination was certainly fascinating. In all this discussion, let's not leave out the Kinderspiel nominations, though. I've had a lot of fun playing Kinderspiel games with my kids in the past, so I always like to learn more about these. This year, like most years, all three nominations are German titles that haven't made it to North America yet. Photo Fish, Speedy Roll, and We Are the Robots. Speedy Roll, which entails rolling a hedgehog over sticky tokens, looks particularly fun and something that my kids would enjoy. A lot of people might justify buying these games as purchases for their kids, but I'm not ashamed to admit that the thought of rolling a hedgehog die sounds like tons of fun to me myself. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about Dominion Menagerie, the new expansion for publisher Rio Grande and designer Donald X. Vaccarino's modern classic Dominion deck building game. I'm a huge Dominion fan. It's one of my top 10 games of all time, and I consider it one of the great revelatory experiences in my board gaming history. I remember distinctly reading the Dominion rulebook for the first time over a decade ago and getting chills because I just knew this was a game that was going to change everything. So of course I get the new expansions every time they come out with a new one. I pre-ordered a Menagerie from Spiel, the local board game cafe, and got it to the table right away after it came in. As the title implies, Menagerie is an animal-themed expansion for the game. There are a couple of new game elements in the set. Exile is a new keyword that temporarily removes a card from play, placing it on the exile mat. If it's still there at the end of the game, it counts for scoring purposes. During the game, gaining another copy of the card enables a player to move the card from the exile mat to the discard pile. Way cards are a new card type similar to events, landmarks, and projects, and introduce alternative actions players can perform with an action card instead of the printed game text. The set also includes some additional options of previously introduced card types in the form of more durations and events. So far, my plays with the new set have been very positive. I'm not sure about the value of the way cards, but the exile keyword introduces some interesting strategic possibilities, both offensive and defensive, that revolve around timing, an aspect of gaming I always appreciate. Durations are my favorite card type, so I'm always happy to see more of those, but my favorite card from the set might be the Black Cat, a reaction card that enables a player to draw 2 cards and gives all other players a curse if any one player gains a victory card. That's fun stuff. This set has changed the way I play the game as well. Previously, I had been resisting the instruction suggestions to shuffle events, landmarks, and projects together with the randomizer cards, and play with any that come up during setup. But with the addition of the way cards, I've decided to compromise with the suggested instructions and create a separate setup deck of these universal effect cards and play with 2 of them each game. This has been working out well for us, and so far we've always had at least one interesting option to consider in the form of these cards during our games. So all things considered, Menagerie is a solid expansion. There's nothing revolutionary in this one, which I'm fine with. More of what's come before is always welcome where Dominion is concerned. But the new elements are easy to integrate and don't add any significant bloat to the experience. And there are plenty of interesting new cards that will encourage players to approach their Dominion experience differently and in new thoughtful ways, which is also always welcome. Obscure Bryce game segment time. This week on the podcast, I'm going to tell you about JamSumo, a handmade flicking style dexterity game from dexterity master Gavin Birnbaum and his publishing company Kubiko Games. I previously talked about his game Karoo on this segment last year. After the perfectly delightful Kickstarter experience of Karoo, I've been buying up any Gavin Birnbaum game that I can find, and whenever he launches a new campaign. So I was a day one backer of JamSumo, which is actually a reprint of the game he first released in 2014. And in typical Gavin Birnbaum Kickstarter fashion, it was just a few months later when I had the beautiful game in my hands. Here's how it works. There are actually 3 rule sets that come with the game. In Jam, players take turns flicking their dice from a platform and try to get them to fall down the hole in the center of the board. In golf-style scoring, the player who gets all of their dice to fall down the hole first scores 0 points, while the other players score points equal to the pips showing on their dice that have not yet fallen down the hole. After a certain number of rounds, the player with the fewest points wins. In the Sumo rule set, players take turns flicking their dice to try to knock their opponent's dice down the hole and score points equal to the pips still showing after all of one player's dice have fallen into the hole. After a certain number of rounds, whoever has the most points wins. And the JamSumo rule set has players play 1 round of each, with the winner having the greatest differential between their scores. Like Karoo, this has turned out to be a great family game for me. Thanks to Tumbling Dice, my kids are already dice-flicking experts, so they already possess the skill set needed to be competitive at this game. And the rules are straightforward enough to be accessible for anyone in a short amount of time. It's tough to say which rule set I like the best, though. I like the golf scoring of Jam, but the objective of hitting others into the hole is more interesting and more challenging in the Sumo rule set. With that division of likes in mind, I do really like what the combined JamSumo game offers. Integrating these various dexterous objectives and scoring mechanics into a single game with the multiple related rule sets is an admirable feat of game design. I'm very happy to have JamSumo in the collection and foresee a lot of fun with it in the future. And I've got 2 other Gavin Birnbaum games in the pipeline that should be arriving by the end of the year too. Something to look forward to. We continue my review of the top 5 games ranked on BGG from 5 years ago and comparing them to my own personal top 5 games from 5 years ago to see how they match up with the number 3s this episode. The 3rd highest ranked game from 2015 on BGG is 7 Wonders Duel, the 2-player only implementation of 7 Wonders from designers Antoine Bauza and Bruno Cathala and published by Repos Productions. This would have been my own personal runner-up for the top 5. It's actually one of my top 30 games of all time. And it's just a testament of how good 2015 was overall that leaves it off my personal top 5. 7 Wonders has gone down in history as an evergreen game and one of the pillars of modern board gaming. 7 Wonders Duel is trending in the same direction and is actually ranked higher than its big brother on BGG overall. I like 7 Wonders as much as the next guy and rated a 9 out of 10, but despite my esteem for that game, count me among those who thinks Duel is an overall even better game. It's so good, and I appreciate how equally viable each victory condition pursuit feels. I can't recommend the expansion, though. In fact, I think Pantheons is one of the worst expansions ever made for a game and fails completely in everything it tries to do. But fortunately, it is a completely unnecessary expansion, and Duel seems like a game that really doesn't need one at all. My own personal third highest game from 2015 is Oh My Goods, the engine-building card game from designer Alexander Pfister and publisher Lookout Games. I still remember playing Oh My Goods for the first time at Gen Con that year. I played a demo of it just to earn a ribbon I needed for Mayfair's Ribbon Quest, but came away from that demo super impressed. Oh My Goods wound up being my surprise at the con, and I started showing it around locally soon afterwards. When the expansions were slow to come to North America, I went out of my way to order them from Lookout's European site. Now, these expansions, Revolt in Longsdale and Escape from Canyon Brook, number among the best board game expansions ever released. The narrative-based campaign mode put Euro campaigns on the map and has become a defining characteristic of Pfister's work as he continued that trend in Blackout, Hong Kong, and Maracaibo. The establishment of the Oh My Goods world has also become significant as Pfister has returned to it multiple times in equally delightful spin-off games. But that briskly paced engine building at Oh My Goods remains so satisfying itself. Now that I've finished up the campaign of Expedition in Newdale, I'm planning on returning to Oh My Goods and play through that campaign again. Well, that will do it for episode 67. Thanks for listening. Feel free to join the Out of the Dust Podcast Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Follow the podcast on Twitter at OutofTheDustBGG. Leave a comment at the Guild. PM me on BGG under user handle Radagast14, or email me at radagast14@CenturyLink.net. And join the Out of the Dust conversation yourself at our monthly geek list at BGG. All right, play me out, Ananda!